Well, Mr. Kόπελ, thank you very much for being with us, and it's a real privilege to do this interview with you.
You're very kind. Thank you.
I want to ask you, you've covered, I don't know how many U.S. elections. Is this election different from others you've covered in the past, and in what way?
I think it's different in many ways, but I think the central difference is one that's been taking place over the past 20 or 30 years. 20 some odd years ago, the racial makeup in this country was about 70% white and 30% other. Now it's much closer to even, and I think the expectation is that within the next 20 years, it will be half white, half non-white. That has had an enormous impact on the American psyche. I think it has accounted for some of the increase in violence that's taken place in this country, and it's certainly having an impact on our elections.
So if white angst or anxiety or whatever is such a big factor, even if Trump loses, that's a factor that's going to stick around for a while, right, as a political factor?
You make an excellent point. People have the impression that this is all about Donald Trump, that if Donald Trump goes away tomorrow, everything will go back to status quo ante. It'll be the way it once was. It won't be. It will be the way things are right now. And if another Trump doesn't come along, and I can't imagine that there'll be another one quite like him, it'll be someone who perhaps is a little more polished, who is a little less outrageous in his behavior, but the underlying theme will be the same.
I wonder, have you met Donald Trump during your career?
Oh, yes, many times.
Did you ever think that he will become such an important figure in American history?
I must confess, you could have put me on the rack and I would have held out until the very end. There was no way he was going to become an important figure. He was the object of ridicule in New York City. The Donald was how he was referred to. I don't think there were two political commentators in this country who 20 years ago could have predicted what has happened.
Now, the current political atmosphere, a lot of people say that it has a lot to do with social media and how people get their information. Do you agree with that?
I do. Look, the difference is we've always had gossips. We've always had rumor mongering. We've always had people who like to stir up trouble. But they used to do it over a couple of beers and a bowl of peanuts in a bar. And there would be 2, maybe 3, maybe 5 people. The difference with social media is the same idiot who was stirring up trouble in the bar in front of 2 or 3 people can now stir it up, and if he is or if she is outrageous enough and interesting enough in what he or she says, within a matter of minutes, that person and what they are saying can have a following of several million people. That clearly is an enormous change from the way things used to be. In other words, the kind of nonsense that might be spread from one end of a bar to another is now being spread around the world.
Is there a cure for that?
No.
Okay. And I assume also that legacy media don't have the importance they used to have, right? Because they used to be pillars of authority, like the New York Times or the networks, your own show, and so on. This doesn't really exist anymore.
No, it does not. You're absolutely right. I mean, it does, and they are referred to as influence makers, right? Mm-hmm. It may be an 18-year-old young man or a 20-year-old young woman whose influence is a function of some particular capacity that she has. It may be that she knows how to blow bubbles with bubble gum. And she does it so entertainingly that she has 5 or 6 million followers. That is an influence maker. That person has the capacity. I mean, take a look at the exuberance of the Harris campaign when a young pop star announced her support. Right? Mm-hmm. Why do we care? Why does she care? She cares because that young woman has quite literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of followers.
Now, the way things are now, how do you see the election outcome developing?
If I had to put a few drachma on it today, I would suggest that I think Trump is going to win. Remember, it's not the popular vote that counts in this country. It's the votes in the Electoral College. And so those few states, that handful of states, the Michigans, the Pennsylvanias, the Floridas, the Californias, they have an unbelievable impact. So that while there is no question as to who had the popular vote in the last election, the questions arose over the very, very tight races in some of those so-called swing states. And that will be the case again this year. Fundamentally, what happens in most of the 47 other states is more or less irrelevant. It's what happens in those critical 5 states that's going to make the difference.
They say that with the Harris candidacy, perhaps a lot of minority people or younger people are going to be registered and they're going to make a difference. Do you buy that?
Well, whatever she ends up bringing in on her side of the ledger, she will, in a negative sense, bring onto Trump's side of the ledger. Because what I was referring to at the very beginning of our conversation, when we talked about the racial balance in this country and how that balance has begun to shift over the last 20 years and how it will continue to shift over the next 20 years until 20, 21 years from now, the expectation is that the number of whites and the number of non-whites in this country will be almost exactly the same. What could more graphically illustrate that battle between the sexes and the races than a woman of color and a man who has shown his racist side on a number of different occasions?
And if Trump is elected, you think it's going to be a different Trump from Trump 1?
I think it will be a definitely more dangerous Trump than Trump during his first term. He will not be surrounding himself with a bunch of people who will be acceptable to the establishment. He will be surrounding himself with people who are totally loyal to him, who will do exactly what it is he wants, or who in their own way will have presented him with options that he finds attractive. And I'm not sure that those options are going to be good for the United States. In fact, I rather suspect they won't be.
And do you think that if the election is close, are we going to go through a prolonged period of, tension and, things being very toxic, even violent?
I believe so, yes. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Trump will lose the popular vote. There's almost no question about that. But that doesn't mean that he will lose the vote in the Electoral College. And we pick our presidents on the basis of who wins the vote, who gets the 270 votes in the Electoral College. So inevitably, you're going to have a situation where if Harris wins in the Electoral College, there is going to be so much debate about what happened in the individual states as there was 4 years ago. I mean, that debate continues to this day. Trump, I think, during the one debate that he had with Vice President Harris, conceded that he probably lost the last election. It's extraordinary. It's taken him 4 years to concede that, almost 4 years. And yet there are still millions of his followers out there who don't believe him, who still believe that he won the election. Now, on the basis of the popular vote, he cannot have. But the popular vote is not what counts. So what I'm saying, Alex, is that it creates a situation where it is almost inevitable that there will be bitter arguments days after, weeks after, possibly even months after the election.
And you think we're going to have similar episodes like January 6th or, things that sort of resemble a civil war kind of situation?
Well, it may not be exactly the same, but are there likely to be outbursts of violence? Yes. I fear that is so. Okay.
Is this period similar to any period of American history, of post-war American history at least?
When you say post-war, I'm glad you said that, because obviously we had a civil war in this country back in the 1860s.
Well, that was a long time ago, yeah.
It's a long time ago, but the same themes, the same underlying friction exists to this day that existed back then. Human nature, the country has changed. What we can do physically has changed. Our reach around the world has changed. But human nature hasn't changed. Racism hasn't changed. That is, I fear, the great American vulnerability. It's not unique to this country, but it is particularly toxic here. And particularly dangerous as far as this upcoming election is concerned.
Okay, Mr. Kόπελ, thank you very much. It was very thoughtful, very insightful, and it was a real privilege, as I said, to have this conversation with you.
Well, I'm pleased to have met you. I hope someday we meet in person.
Thank you very much.